Got a good Tuesday evening to you, and welcome to spring. As we all muddled through windy, rainy Atlantic City, and you find us here at the Irish Pub. It's 7:05 on Tuesday evening, the first day of spring, and I'm meteorologist Dan Skeldon, and you're tuned in to Tidal Flooding Talk.
Hi there, we're here live at the Irish Pub hosting Tidal Flooding Talk. We're brought to you by the New Jersey Coastal Coalition, which is a 501c3 nonprofit organization, working for you to bring you information about coastal flooding.
And she needs no introduction. She's Palma Accardi, and we're joined by Chris Huch. We're always joined by a great guest. We're going to talk tidal flooding. We are going to talk a little weather too, so you guys are going to be either bored or mildly entertained about the upcoming tidal flooding, about the upcoming snow, and about the nor'easter. Chris Huch is our guest.
Glad to be here.
I've had an honor to present on a panel with Chris before, and varied background. We're going to get to know Chris. We're going to talk some tidal flooding, and very briefly, let's give you a quick storm synopsis, because I always say 99% of conversations start with the weather. For me, it's like 110% of them start with the weather. But yeah, today we had the rain, sleet, a little snow. Tonight it's rain and sleet, and we kind of get a bit of a lull. A little minor tidal flooding this evening. Tomorrow's the main event. Tomorrow and tomorrow night, we have 2 rounds of moderate tidal flooding. Nothing major, but moderate tidal flooding. And your high tides are 10 to 11 a.m. and p.m., a little bit later in the back bays. So we are going to have that to deal with, and then we're going to have some snow, right? When everyone wants it for spring, I'm thinking 4 to 8 inches for most of South Jersey, a little bit less right along the shore, where it changes over last, then maybe up to 8 to 12 inches up towards Philadelphia, where they're getting ready to play baseball in a couple of weeks. It'll be gone by then, I promise. But yeah, it's not what we want to hear. So we are going to get into more details. We'll take your questions and comments. But right now we want to get to know Chris, and as always, Palma fires away with the first question.
Hi, yes. So we're here at the Irish Pub. If you'd like to join us, it's 164 South St. James Place. If you can't join us, you're welcome to comment live, and we'll try to answer any questions that we can. Chris Huch is here. He's a noted marine scientist. He's been working along our coast since Superstorm Sandy. So Chris, if you'd like to introduce yourself, how did you get started with flood mitigation?
Sure. Well, first off, it's great to be here with you both. I'm really excited to take part in this. I think this is a fantastic opportunity for viewers at home to kind of get a little bit of detailed information about work that the Coalition's doing, and also work that the scientific community is doing in the area as well. It's really, really important, and this is a problem that's not going to be going away anytime soon. It's something that we need to adjust to and adopt to, but as we do so, as long as we are moving in the right direction, I think we're going to be in good shape. So a little bit about myself. I grew up in Monmouth County originally. I grew up in a town called Ocean Grove. Ended up moving down to southern Ocean County, Tuckerton area around 1998, I believe. When that happened, I was really kind of taken back by the whole concept of what a bay was, because we just had the ocean up in Monmouth County. We didn't have a bay, and I wasn't close enough to Sandy Hook Bay to have that experience. So the concept of back bay flooding and things like that, that was a new experience for me. I decided that I wanted to pursue marine science when I got into college. Ended up going to Stockton. It was Stockton College then, not Stockton University. And then stayed on for my professional science master's in environmental science, and was really excited to work with some of the top scientists in New Jersey that were at Stockton.
And you've done some work with the New Jersey Coastal Coalition, which is the sponsor of Tidal Flooding Talk. Every week, New Jersey Coastal Coalition, brings you Tidal Flooding Talk, and they're working year-round, 365, 24/7. You've done some work with them to spread tidal flooding awareness, education, and work to kind of learn to live with it along the shore. And that's one thing that, as you kind of alluded to, we're learning to live with a lot more. Meteorologists like to talk with our hands, and they should never keep objects near me here on the table here. And we have several rounds of tidal flooding coming up. Now, you did some work with Jacques Cousteau Reserve.
Yes.
Now you're with a firm called Tetra Tech.
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about both and how the work is similar and how it's different.
Sure. So actually, when I finished up grad school, I ended up working for a small nonprofit on Long Beach Island for a little bit there called the Alliance for a Living Ocean. And for my first year there, I was working on protecting the environment from people. and then we got hit by Sandy, and my joke is that I switched from protecting the environment from people to protecting people from the environment, just knowing how big of an impact Sandy was on everybody in coastal New Jersey. So I did some work on helping out with the recovery effort there, and I was approached by the Jacques Cousteau Reserve to start working more in depth with communities. So over the past 4 years, I worked with my good friend Jenna Gatto, and we worked with about 45 different communities throughout New Jersey, helping them bounce back from Sandy and also look at what to do to kind of move forward with the concept that we need to be thinking not so much about storms that have happened in the past, but what our future conditions might be as well. So I had a great time working with towns up and down the coastline, getting to meet a lot of interesting people, and coming up with a lot of new concepts in terms of how to deal with coastal flooding and how to live with it, and also what some of the long-term things we might want to watch out for are. And then just recently, a couple months ago, I started with Tetra Tech. Tetra Tech is a consulting firm that does all kinds of different work internationally, but my division focuses on hazard mitigation. And hazard mitigation is a concept where you're trying to make sure that if a hazard event of some sort, be it coastal flooding, earthquake, wildfire, things like that, does occur, you want to limit the amount of damage that it causes. You're not ever going to be able to stop these things from occurring, but you want to make sure that if they do occur, the impact to both human life and environmental systems as well is limited.
Now, what do you think the biggest challenge is? I mean, you've said you dealt with over 40-something communities. The biggest challenge, confronting coastal communities when it comes to tidal flooding? I mean, is it explaining the danger? Is it getting residents prepared? Is it infrastructure, improving that, or is it a multitude of things? What do you think the biggest challenge is, or just say for a typical bay or oceanfront community?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think one of the biggest challenges here in coastal New Jersey is actually the rapid turnover in terms of people that are in the areas that might experience coastal flooding. So, for example, we've got a lot of people that are only here in the summer. We've got a lot of people that are only going to be stopping by just for a week or two. Some people that are just coming down for the day. And these are folks that have no idea about how the ocean works, the fact that tides even come in and go out. And I'm sure a lot of our viewers here are used to seeing this. They come and they set up their beach towel in the summer, and then somebody goes and sets their beach towel a little bit closer to the water than they do, and then the tide comes back in, everybody's crunched in, and it's a big mess. I'd say the biggest issue that we have facing ourselves right now is that we have a very limited amount of knowledge from our general public in terms of what coastal flooding is and how to prepare for it. But I think that's why we need to be having these discussions to help educate everyone.
Now, if you could think of a couple things for our viewers to do to prepare for these flooding times, what would they be?
I think the most important thing to do is have a plan ready to go. Have an action plan ready. And I think at this point we're on nor'easter number 4?
This is 4.
Number
We're
4
calling it a 4-easter.
Yeah.
This March because we've had 4 of them. You're right.
Yeah. So I think at this point anybody that's been down in coastal New Jersey for the month of March is well aware of what you need to be doing in this situation. Knowing, okay, low-lying areas, I need to avoid those. I need to move my car out of those areas. If I'm going to have my property be impacted by coastal flooding, maybe it's time to get out there, last-minute check, make sure anything that might float away is tied down, brought inside, things like that. A lot of what happens in coastal flooding events is just people being unaware that the water is going to reach a certain level. It's not necessarily a damaging event, except when we're talking about large-scale events like Sandy or the storm of '62. A lot of these are just flooding events that are taking place in a very defined area, and as long as we know where those areas are and how to react to that flooding, we're going to be okay. So it's really important to just make sure that you have a trusted weather source.
I don't know about
right
trust.
there.
You should never totally trust any weather source, but thank you.
There you
Thank
go.
you.
Have your trusted weather source ready to go. Be prepared when a storm is coming or when coastal flooding is forecast to go out and take care of things and have a little checklist ready to go.
And I will tell you too, as a meteorologist, I think one of our challenges is explaining, if we say the tide, for instance, tomorrow evening, 10 to 11 o'clock, it's going to be a highest high tide, Wednesday evening, 7.3 above mean low water. in Atlantic City. Now, no one knows what that means unless you are a tidal flooding, like, nut that always pays attention to this stuff. So one of the things that's a challenge for us is communicating just how bad the flooding is going to be. That's why we use minor, moderate, major. And one of the good things about having these recent storms, if there is such thing as a good thing about that comes from these storms, is now we have benchmarks. Now we have measuring sticks, so we can say this will be a little worse than Sandy, not as bad as Sandy, a foot below Jonas. We have these measuring sticks where before we didn't have these big storms. There were generations of people in between the 62 and the recent storms in the 90s and 2000s where we didn't have those big storms. So again, coming up today, little minor tidal flooding this evening, and then we have moderate flooding. And that moderate flooding normally shuts down the Black Horse Pike, normally shuts down the White Horse Pike, West End Avenue in Atlantic City. I'm sure Palma or Margate, you'll know the areas that normally flood. If moderate flooding is more than nuisance, but it's not majorly disruptive where barrier islands will be cut off from the mainland for a high tide or two. And again, that is tomorrow morning and tomorrow evening, 2 rounds of tidal flooding. The snow comes in the afternoon and the night. Let's say hi to a couple of viewers here. Will a state of emergency be issued, Veronica Rivera? Tough to say. That's a governor decision. New governor, not doing how he compares to Christie in issuing these things or not. So Wildwood, Back Bay area, Sally, absolutely. West Wildwood, normal areas of Wildwood, the Route 47 bridge during high tide, that will probably be cut off as well. Let's see, Ben Murphy wants to know, do you own waterfront property?
Occasionally.
If that's not too personal a question.
So I actually... the property that I'm at right now, we back up to a creek that normally is not a tidal creek, but in a strong enough event, and if we do hit the major flooding threshold, I do know that yes, water will back up to our property. And in the case of Sandy, actually came underneath the house, was within 3 inches, I think, of actually flooding the inside portion of the house, but luckily didn't come any higher than that. But everything underneath, HVAC systems and the garage, they got nailed pretty good. So in terms of trying to make sure I have enough space away from the water, that's always important. Sometimes that's unavoidable though.
Do you think, and let me just follow up on Ben's question, would you buy, in a flood area, or what do you say to someone who, is thinking of moving to the shore? And, obviously some homes are, I don't want to say immune, but are a lot less vulnerable than others.
Yeah.
You have this dream house, it's a great price, but it's in a flood area. What do you say to that person? Especially if they're not aware, of how tidal flooding works.
And that's the most important thing. That's the key, the end of your last statement. Being aware of how it works. Whenever I have friends that are coming to me and asking me, hey, is this a good property to buy? Would you buy here? Would you live here? The key is what you're willing to live with. There's people that are not going to be okay with ever having water anywhere near their house. They don't want to deal with that sort of thing ever. Then there's other people that say, hey, yeah, I'm in a low-lying area. I'm really close to the water. It's an erosion zone. I'm going to get flooded. But at the same time, there's a decent trade-off, and they're comfortable with that. So you need to make sure when you're going out and looking at buying property that you are aware of where you sit within the flood zone, you're aware of the flooding history of that house, and also very important to know what the elevation of your house is. Your house may be elevated out of where water can actually reach. Water could come in underneath and go back out. You might be okay with keeping your house protected then. But then there's a lot of construction that took place in the 1960s and 1970s in our area that's slab on grade, meaning that the house is sitting basically right at ground level. And those properties, if water gets anywhere near them, very well might be negatively impacted. So it's really important to do your research, really important to find out where you are in the flood zone. Also find out what your flood insurance costs are going to be, because that can play a major factor in people's decision in terms of do we want to live in a coastal area that is prone to flooding or not.
And that is a preview for our next episode too, because we'll have Tom Heist here from Thomas Heist Insurance Agency about flood insurance. So.
And we already tried it. You were here last time Tom was here. I think I was detained by another nor'easter. What was that? Nor'easter number 1 this March. So yeah, we are looking forward to having Tom here, and then in a future episode, Scott Evans, Atlantic City Fire Department Chief. They have to deal, emergency and first responders have to deal with it all the time. So again, great guest lineup. One always seems to be just as good as the next, and we appreciate Chris being here as well. Pauline mentioned something, we have East Point Lighthouse, and we have all the lighthouses, and that one's kind of been in danger lately with flooding, and can you move it back? It's been in jeopardy there, with the sea level in Delaware Bay coming up, and that's something we have to deal with too. And not only homeowners, but some of the historic
landmarks.
properties and landmarks, aren't immune to it either.
Yeah, I mean, we look at coastal flooding just in terms of water coming up and going down, but coastal erosion is also a big problem, and that's, in the case of that lighthouse, that's been an issue there. They've been slowly having their shoreline retreat. One thing I will say is that moving a lighthouse is not necessarily unprecedented. They actually moved Cape Hatteras Lighthouse decade or two ago now, which is really, really impressive. If you haven't seen any of the footage from that, they basically lifted it up and put it on this big tank that kind of rolled back a couple thousand feet away from the waterfront there in North Carolina. So it's something that can be done, and unfortunately in certain instances it's something that either has to be done or you have to risk losing some of these structures. For example, we had the famous story of Tucker's Island, which was a barrier island on the southern end of Long Beach Island, north of Brigantine. Was this great seaside resort for a long time. The waters decided that it shouldn't be there anymore. This is back at the turn of the century that things started going downhill, and unfortunately that island no longer exists. There's a famous lighthouse that was there, and it ended up toppling into the sea with every other structure on that island. So these are parts of coastal living, unfortunately. Those are more extreme cases. This is something that luckily we've got the Army Corps of Engineers, the DEP, Department of Coastal Engineering. They're looking forward to make sure that they are getting out in front of these big-time hazards to make sure we don't lose some of these things.
And I mean, there was a town called South Cape May before, and those tracks that emerged down there now, like in the sand leading to nowhere, seemingly went to South Cape May. And we have an upcoming series this summer with New Jersey Coastal Coalition, where we're going to go out and we're going to visit these, places that nature has taken back. There's some Delaware Bay shore towns or ghost towns like Thompson's Beach and Seabreeze, and along the shore. Tucker's Island is a great one that you mentioned as well. So tidal flooding and just the ever changing shape of our coastline is kind of. I mean, I don't want to say it's sad, but it's cool, and it's a reality that it's always changing. Longport, and down at the end of Absecon Island, starts at 11th Street for a reason. You know the reason? Of course you do, right?
Yeah, I mean, it used to exist.
I mean, all the streets used to exist. And our barrier islands are always changing, and the 62 storm cut a hole right through the middle of LBI, right around, what was it, Harvey Cedars?
Yep, Harvey Cedars.
Yeah, it cut a hole right there. So tidal flooding is a reality, and our coastline changes shape all the time, and that's a reality as well. Any things that we wanted to talk about that we didn't ask Chris?
One thing I worked on at the reserve, the Jacques Cousteau Reserve, was looking not only at current flooding conditions, but also future flooding conditions. And that's a really, really tricky subject. I'm sure, Dan, you could speak on, how difficult it is to make a long-term forecast in terms of weather. And you might consider long-term to be anything beyond 5 to 7 days. When we're talking about the concept of sea level rise, that's something that's been taking place for thousands of years, but we're also starting to see some changes, and trying to figure out how rapid sea level rise is going to take place over the next 50 to 100 years is really, really difficult. But at the same time, we're doing some work now in the scientific communities and in a lot of the academic communities as well to try to make sure that we're getting good information, the best possible information on sea level rise, to start to add to our conversation about coastal flooding and how that might play out. A minor flooding event today might not have much of an impact on someone's way of life, but maybe a minor flooding event in the future, if you add, maybe a foot or two of sea level rise, then we're talking about a much stronger flooding event. So it'll take a much weaker storm to have the same level of impact as a strong storm today. So that's something that we want to keep our eyes on and stay tuned in with. Again, that's a growing field of research, and I think it's really important moving forward.
Absolutely, great point. Any other last thoughts, Palma?
Well, I think we do owe Chris a special thank you for joining us, even in these weather conditions.
It's my pleasure.
So we do have something from the New Jersey Coastal Coalition and the Irish Pub. A t-shirt.
Thank you very much. Much appreciated. Yeah.
Maybe you can wear it this summer. But
We're going to have to give umbrellas next time Chris comes. Irish Club umbrellas or snow brushes. Again, a quick weather recap. I know some of you guys are wondering about the weather as well. We got rain and sleet tonight. Chris noted, on his way down south in the parkway, some slick spots. Farther, it's rain in Atlantic City. It's nasty. It's horizontal rain, but areas farther north and west have had some snow and sleet today. We get a little bit of a lull tonight. I don't think there's much in the way of accumulation. Tomorrow morning, it's rain and sleet, and some snow starts to mix in. But as far as snow for South Jersey, Atlantic, Cape May counties, the Ocean County shoreline, even west into Cumberland County, this is a mainly afternoon and night snow event. So that would be tomorrow afternoon, tomorrow evening, tomorrow night. Let's say roughly 2 p.m. to 2 a.m. will be the crux of the heavy wet snow. I'm thinking 4 to 8 inches for most of us. All right. And a little more, 8 to 12 up towards Philly, maybe west of Hamilton, Vineland, Millville, and maybe a little less right along the shore. But I think any snow in spring is depressing, right?
Yeah.
I mean, as soon as you turn the calendar to spring, the guys were outside waiting. There were people outside in the pouring rain and sleet waiting for their free 99-cent water ice today. I mean,
It's
people
Rita's
just
Day.
get so excited for spring, no matter what the weather, they're going to get that 99-cent water ice and get soaking wet in the process. Or DQ, they don't have blizzards per se, and we're not having a blizzard this time, but they get their free vanilla ice cream cone as well. So spring is here. We got 93 days of spring to get some nicer weather in here. There is 2 rounds of moderate tidal flooding coming up tomorrow morning, 10 to 11 a.m., and tomorrow evening, 10 to 11 p.m. Hopefully it's the last snow of the season, and again, 4 to 8 I think is what most of us are going to see if the changeover is quicker. We always ask ourselves, the meteorologists, what can go wrong? What are the goalposts of the forecast? If the changeover is quicker, I could see some 10, 11 inch amounts getting into South Jersey. But again, I think 4 to 8 is going to be the average. If the changeover is slower, it might be 2, 3, or 4 inches. But again, we're going to go 4 to 8 as the safe forecast call. And tidal flooding, again, low end moderate, I think, is what we're talking about tomorrow morning and tomorrow evening. So the evening high tide is going to be interesting. You're going to have snow piling up, and you're going to have floodwaters in the streets of shore towns. So it's going to be interesting, scenic, messy, depressing. I mean, you can kind of feel your own adjective.
Now, are we expecting a freeze to happen on the backside of the storm? That was an issue a couple years ago on Long Beach Island where we had some snow laying on the streets. Coastal flooding came up. Everything kind of got really slushy, and then it froze in place, and we had a couple inches of ice on our streets.
That's a good question. I do think it gets below freezing tomorrow night. I don't think it's going to go down to 20 where you really need to create widespread ice, but there could be some slush and some slick spots as well, and that's something we'll have to contend with. The good news, guys, is nor'easter number 5 is going to be on the map by this weekend, but we think it's going to just miss us to the south.
Be good news.
We think. I think it's going to be a close call, and it's going to be a big ocean storm out there. But for now, fingers crossed, let's hope we're to 4 and done, and we can start getting some spring weather in here. Let me check for any last-minute questions. And again, Palma, you want to mention, we have these great guests lined up every single week. Next week, we have another one for you.
yeah, like I said, you can either come here live in person at the Irish Pub next week to see Tom Heist. If not, we are on Facebook Live as well. Send your comments, send your questions, and yeah.
Deviana Castrolines, as Chris, this is in reference to you. I advised the community about tidal flooding, and all I got was this dumb T-shirt. That's supposed to be funny. All right. And I wear my Irish Pub sweatshirt, which is maybe a little more fitting.
Yeah.
That's supposed to be a funny joke about.
I'm
these
getting
T-shirts
changed out of the shirt as soon as we get off camera, so I'm very
and
excited.
we're so grateful for the Irish Pub. You guys can come on down here and watch us live. We're here every Tuesday, unless the storm has one of us detained, most likely me. And Palma was where she was supposed to be yesterday, and I was where I was supposed to be. We just couldn't make the split screen work. So hopefully we'll be able to do that in the future, since one of us is going to be out in the storm in the future.
We're both.
I think you got the short straw there, but yeah, someone's going to be cozy inside doing the forecasting, and someone's going to be out in the elements. So I guess it's negotiable as to who can do what. But thanks, guys, for joining us. Chris Huch, thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
From Tetra Tech, and formerly Jacques Cousteau Reserve. And Palma and I hope to see you back here next Tuesday. Enjoy the snow, enjoy the flooding, or at least be aware of the flooding, and we'll try to muddle through it and get to the sunshine that comes back later in the week. Have a great night, guys.